The midlife crisis, a modern phenomenon. When we hear the term midlife crisis, it's easy to picture a caricature, perhaps a middle-aged man in a red sports car, attempting to reclaim his youth. But behind the stereotype lies a complex psychological, biological, and cultural phenomenon. In a remarkable lecture delivered at the Royal Society, the speaker not only shared heartfelt gratitude for the institutions and people who shaped his career, but also guided us through an intellectual and deeply human exploration of midlife, what it means, why it matters, and how it emerged as a modern crisis. This article will unpack the key ideas from that lecture, offering a detailed expert interpretation of the midlife crisis, blending psychology, history, social science, and cultural evolution, the personal context, gratitude foundations, and institutions. Before diving into theory, the speaker honored 3 institutions that shaped his professional journey: the Wellcome Trust, the University of Exeter, and most personally, his family. This wasn't just polite protocol. It was a poignant acknowledgement of the fact that no researcher or individual navigates life alone. These expressions of gratitude framed the deeper message of the talk, that identity and purpose are shaped not only by personal ambition, but by the networks and communities that support us. The unlikely subject: midlife crisis at the Royal Society. Scientific inquiry. It may seem unusual to present a lecture on midlife crisis at a prestigious institution dedicated to science. Eminent figures. The speaker draws a compelling parallel between his subject and the 3 eminent figures the lecture is named after: John Wilkins, J.D. Bernal, and Peter Medawar. Senescence and middlescence. Particularly relevant is Medawar's interest in senescence, the biological aging process. Medawar saw aging not only as a biological challenge but as an unresolved scientific puzzle. The concept of midlife emerged historically as the period between adolescence and senescence, or what was often called middlescence. Reggie Perrin, the fictional face of a real crisis. To illustrate the emotional and existential pain of midlife, the speaker referenced The Fall and Rise of Reginald Perrin, a satirical BBC series from the 1970s. Reggie Perrin, a 46-year-old suburban man, becomes disillusioned with his job, family life, and sense of purpose. He fakes his death and reinvents himself, symbolizing a desire to escape not only the pressures of society, but his own aging identity. This character was not an outlier. Reggie embodied the era's growing awareness of the midlife crisis, a term introduced a decade earlier by Elliot Jacks, a psychoanalyst and social scientist. Elliot Jacks and the Psychological Origins of the Crisis. In 1965, Jacks coined the phrase midlife crisis after observing a recurring psychological pattern in men between the ages of 35 and 45. He described it as a depressive crisis, triggered by the realization that life had peaked and the only trajectory left was downward, toward decline and death. In response to this existential dread, individuals often resorted to manic compensatory behaviors: obsessive concern with youth and health, risky sexual behavior, drastic career changes, emotional withdrawal or sudden reawakening. The crisis mirrored the adolescent identity crisis, but instead of grappling with who one might become, the midlife individual wrestled with what was lost or unfulfilled. Jung, Erikson, and the life stage psychology of midlife. The speaker broadened the analysis by referencing Carl Jung and Erikson, who both saw human development as a series of stages, each with its own psychological conflicts. Erikson described midlife as a battle between generativity versus stagnation. Generativity involves creating, nurturing, and contributing to society. Stagnation implies emotional or creative dead ends, breeding dissatisfaction. In this context, the midlife crisis is not merely a personal failing, but a developmental turning point where unresolved goals, unrealized dreams, or lack of purpose bubble to the surface. Biological interpretations, decline in vitality and the clock of mortality. Physical changes, loss of muscle mass, decline in energy, menopause in women, and hormonal shifts in men. Awareness of mortality. Peter Medawar viewed aging as a biological riddle unsolved by evolution. In this view, the midlife crisis was a reaction to the decline in physical vitality, especially for those who derived identity from productivity, appearance, or physical performance. Gendered misattributions. For women, cultural narratives reduce their midlife experience to the ticking of a biological clock. In menopause, infertility, and the emptiness. Often, men even blamed their midlife struggles on their partner's hormonal changes, reinforcing gendered misattributions. From individual to culture, why the midlife crisis became common. Here's where the speaker took the lecture into a deeper sociological realm. He argued that the midlife crisis is not merely psychological or biological, but a product of societal structure. The standardized life course, 20th century. During the mid-1900s, life in the West became increasingly predictable and standardized. 1. Early marriage. By 24 for women. 2. Children clustered in the first few years of marriage. 3. Long careers with a set retirement age. 4. Increasing life expectancy into the 70s or 80s. This created a pressure cooker of expectations. By age 40, people were expected to have it all: career success, family stability, social status. If they didn't, dissatisfaction and anxiety arose, not because they were psychologically weak, but because society imposed uniform milestones and rigid timelines. Age anxiety and the rise of social comparison. With these standard milestones came age consciousness. People began measuring their lives not just privately but socially, against peers, neighbors, or even idealized versions of themselves. The sandwich generation, squeezed between children and aging parents. Midlife also became logistically difficult. Individuals in their 40s and 50s often found themselves caring for both adolescent children and elderly parents simultaneously. This dual burden led to emotional exhaustion, financial strain, and identity confusion. Women experienced this through the empty nest phase, often losing a sense of purpose. Men experienced it through occupational burnout or feelings of inadequacy. Even inheritance patterns changed. In the 1890s, people inherited wealth by age 37. By the 1940s, it came at 56, too late to support young families, adding further pressure. Conclusion: rethinking the midlife crisis. The speaker's core argument was this: the midlife crisis is not simply a personal flaw or hormonal shift. It is a cultural symptom, a reflection of how we structure time, assign meaning, and value productivity in adult life. Rather than medicalize or ridicule it, we must understand it as a cultural construction shaped by expectations, social timelines, gender roles, economic systems. By seeing the crisis in this light, we can approach midlife with compassion, awareness, and a greater sense of freedom to redefine our identity on our own terms, not society's. Final thought: midlife is not the end of growth, it's a pivot point. Whether triggered by unmet goals, changing bodies, or shifting roles, the midlife transition can become a powerful opportunity for reinvention, reflection, and renewal if we stop viewing it as a crisis and start treating it as the second act